It looked fine, but if you feel you want to read again,
It's such a good quote. Read it again.
In our struggle for transcendence, we cannot separate our professional efforts from the totality of our day-to-day lives. Resolving contradiction is the essence of the creative process in artistic production and in our commitments to social change. Our creative gifts obligate us to a larger responsibility in making history. We have an opportunity each day to make political decisions and to make choices consistent with the affirmation of life. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't you think that in some ways, like when you come across a cultural disconnect where you feel like there's really a misunderstanding happening, it's because the therapist is the therapist. It's their responsibility to check themselves out.
Yeah, sure.
The patient doesn't have to do that work because they're just who they are. But it's like it's the therapist's job and it's the supervisor's job.
Absolutely.
So if there's a disconnect or a misunderstanding or something isn't working well with communication, or if there's something that is not feeling right, then it's the supervisor's job to figure out what that is, and not necessarily by asking the student or the trainee to explain it to them, because that's a burden to explain your own culture. It's like, then they have to go that extra distance to figure themselves out and then communicate it to you. It's like we have to find out about the people that we're working with so that we can be of service and that we can support the work that they're doing.
Sometimes it might drive us outside this particular situation, and his research might come in here. What is there I should be knowing about
Well, research
this?
and networking, it's one of the reasons why this whole film came together.
Yeah.
Is because I'm interested in networking outside the school, outside my range of I'm losing the word, outside of who I know, and cultivating new relationships and new friends and being a bridge, so that she can ask you that question, because I don't have the answer to that question. It's not my experience, but I know it's important to her. Maybe you could start by telling us about your really early experiences in art therapy. Like, what was it like in the very beginning when you were attending the early conferences, and how did you find your way into art therapy?
Well, the way I found an entree into art therapy doesn't begin with being in a circle of art therapists or anything like that. I quit my commercial art job, and that was a very serious decision, because that was my income, and I had a family to deal with. Anyway, the reason that came about in the first place was that I had gone to hear Martin Luther King give his I Have a Dream speech in Washington. And I was so moved by that experience and what it said to me about the way I should be using my art skills, that I decided I would get out of commercial art, because that was an occupation that dictated to me how I should use my art. If I hadn't had the inspiration that I got through the civil rights movement, I might have remained there. But this really awakened me, pulled me out. So I had to find a job. And that's the beginning of how we got to, I got together with Edith Kramer. Because while I was working there, I learned that Edith Kramer was working on the floor below the floor I was working on, she was working with children and doing art therapy. What is this art therapy? What are you talking about?
When was this?
This was, I can't give you the exact,
Around.
but around in the early 60s. I would say 1964. So I met Edith, and she allowed me to observe, her for a while, what she was doing, and she explained, she explained some things to me. And so I went back upstairs, and I said, well, maybe I can become an art therapist. So that's where that started. So, well, one day she invited me to go with her. She told me about this art therapy, this meeting of art therapists that she was going to, that they were cooking up something. They were going to start an organization of some kind. It'd be good if you could go along, because, maybe you can be part of that. So I went with her. And it was an interesting experience, because got into this room with all these people, and I didn't see anyone that I could recognize being of my race. I was, like the proverbial fly in the bowl of milk. That's how I felt, there I was. And with no real experience, so all these people were, as far as I knew, they were all professionals. So you can imagine, what my feeling was, here I am with this, no experience, and, Anyway, the best thing to do in a situation like that is to listen. There wasn't much I could say, but I could listen. And ask questions. Whenever I felt the need to ask a question, I would ask. Usually I ask Edith, because I knew her,
Would you consider her as a mentor at that time?
Yeah, you might say she was a mentor. She taught me some things that I needed to know at first. So that I really left that experience. But before I go any further with that, I knew how I felt about being in that situation, but I had a sense of how some of the people there felt about me. I didn't feel that much of a welcoming. I felt there was some politeness, when I was introduced, but I didn't feel that I was being welcomed in really as a part, come on in, be one of us. I didn't get that feeling for the most part. So
Can I just ask a question about, because I keep hearing you say it was an art program for you to do in etiquette, and then going there with a bunch of artists and providing art making for the prisoners, and I was wondering that, did you see yourself as an art therapist when you team up with other artists and went to the prisons?
Well, we didn't go to Attica. That was just the beginning point
okay.
in terms of getting things started.
How about
But the fact is, when I got involved with this, I was an art therapist at the time.
Oh, okay.
And this was kind of like something I did outside of the hospital situation.
I see.
Because I didn't only function I was thoroughly involved in doing the kind of art that was that spoke to the situation that people found themselves in, that I found myself in. You know, that the world, the city I lived in needed changing, the state I lived in needed changing, the country I lived in needed changing, the world I was in needed changing. Sure, we can express ourselves artistically, you know, about good things that are happening to us. But it's when we get into the negative things that are happening not only to us but to our neighbors, you know, and our fellow human beings, whether they're in our community or wherever they are, if we're concerned about how life is going with them, and we are creative people, and we're asking ourselves, you know, how can I deal with this? What can I say? Well, begin with where you are at creatively. You can get to your canvas. Get to your hunk of clay. Get it exposed. Get some response. Get some reaction to it. You know? We're talking about how in art therapy, an art therapist can conduct, you know, a situation going on in a clinic, a hospital setting. But let's take this outside of that type of setting and talk about people who are having negative experiences in their community, at their job, at school, at work. See? So, to put it that way, I'm saying that when you get a group of people that come into the clinical setting with these kinds of troubles, they can gain through art therapy, they can gain an education. See? You got to go back out into the world. You're not going to stay here forever. We want you to go back into the world. You know, go back to your job, go back to school, go back to wherever it is where this stress was laid on you. Go back now and deal with it. You've learned something here that you can use there. See?
So it appears is that you're an advocate for like socialization in the context of the group.
Yes.
As well as like allowing like a broader scope of socialization and change within the community. Would you consider yourself like a social activist? And how, if so, how do you like equate that with your experience as an art therapist?
Well, I'm an activist in that room with those clients, with those patients. I'm an activist, and they are functioning as activists as well, because what are they dealing with? They're dealing with the situation that they've elected to put up on that mural. That is something that has been affecting them outside of this hospital or clinic or wherever. Or they are dealing with a situation that is happening within this setting. See? And I'm thanking him for his sign-off statement. Thank you, Joe, and thank you all the listeners. You have been a wonderful audience. Those of you who are or are trying to be sensitive to the realities of all people could hardly leave this auditorium without being inspired. They have talked to you about their personal experiences working with and addressing themselves to the specific needs of third world people. I think that you cannot deny the need for a culture-specific approach to dealing with the problems of third world people in the alien socio-economic environment which characterizes American society. You who recognize this need must join us in the struggle to bring into being the kinds of programs that will prepare more third world people to enter not only the art therapy profession, but all other health-related professions. As I close this session, I do so with the firm belief that there are those among you who will join us in doing just that. And I'm sorry to say that not many people, some people have attempted to bring this about, but not enough people within the Art Therapy Association. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Cliff, I wanted to ask you, from my own perspective, about your experience of cross-cultural supervision and also your thoughts about multiculturalism and cultural competency in art therapy and how you've experienced that in your work.
now what I was saying to the Art Therapy Association was, okay, it's not that a person has to be black to deal with black patients. But if a white person comes in to deal with a group of black people, that person should know that a culture-specific approach should be used, because she's dealing with people that are of a culture different from hers or his. Learn about them, who they are, what their specific needs are. See? Don't take some, highfalutin, professorial, approach to these folks, because they're not going to understand where you're coming from, and you won't understand where they're coming from, and nothing is going to happen. See? So it's not a matter that, I certainly wasn't saying that a white person has to deal with white patients and a black person has to deal with black patients. That's not what I was saying. But I did recognize that there weren't enough people of different colors in the profession, is what I was saying. See? Let's get some balance here. Some racial, ethnic, cultural balance in this mix. Is this helpful?
I think it's very helpful, and I think it's also helpful for people who aren't black as well to hear from a black man. And men are underrepresented in the field, and what's that experience like, having that bridge between that cultural piece? I have this story to go forward, because you spoke a lot of rich information about how to push forward, which is hard to do when sometimes you feel alone, or I can only speak for myself sometimes when I feel alone in my struggles and situations. But then knowing that there are resources and there are support and bridges have been made, and there is some progress, though it is slow. And I think that it's time for me to step up and do my part as well. And it may be small pieces, but it's the small things we know. So now it's my turn to share my story and to become a bridge and to start, to begin. So.